I used to be the family outcast, the person everyone overlooked at gatherings, until the day I inherited everything and watched them all come back, suddenly interested. For 28 years, I was practically invisible at every holiday dinner. My cousins were praised for even minor achievements, while I could have made groundbreaking discoveries and still be asked when I'd get a real job. Aunt Veronica would literally walk around me to hug someone else. Uncle Randall proudly introduced his kids to strangers, but consistently forgot I was even there. This is my nephew, Theo, the doctor, and my daughter, Ava, the lawyer. He'd boast at dinner parties, eyes glowing with pride. Then his gaze would slide past me as if I were part of the furniture, even when I was standing there holding the expensive wine I'd brought as a gift. I learned early on that cheap gifts only gave them more excuses to dismiss me. My so-called mistake? Dropping out of law school in my second year to launch a tech company. To them, I'd thrown away a prestigious path to play with computers. The fact that my company, Cloud Sync Solutions, was thriving and earning 7 figures annually meant nothing. Because I wasn't a lawyer, doctor, or banker, I simply didn't exist in their social hierarchy. Quinn's going through a phase, my mother would explain at family events. He'll come to his senses and finish law school. She said this 7 years after I'd signed my first $1 million client contract. After my college graduation, I stopped trying. I'd earned a master's degree in computer science while working full-time, maintaining a 4.0 GPA despite 60-hour work weeks between my startup and coursework. When I shared my graduation photo in the family group chat, the silence lasted 3 days. Meanwhile, when my cousin Finn got promoted to assistant manager at a coffee shop, making $12 an hour, the chat blew up with 47 congratulations, 3 dinner invitations, and a group gift of a gold watch for the successful businessman in the family. At that point, I was employing 15 people. Yet at Christmas dinners, I was seated at the kids' table at 28, next to a 7-year-old cousin and a high chair. At weddings, they excluded me from family photos. "Could you take this for us?" they'd ask, handing me their phones like I was the hired photographer. They talked around me as though I wasn't there, discussing my life in third person while I stood nearby with a beer, wondering why I'd driven 3 hours to be ignored. Aunt Veronica, as if on cue, would ask my mom, "Whatever happened to Quinn?" while I sat just feet away. "Oh, he's still doing that computer thing," Mom would reply, waving her hand dismissively. "My computer thing." Mom would reply, waving her hand dismissively. My computer thing had just landed a contract with a Fortune 500 company, but facts didn't fit their narrative. The worst part? I kept showing up, hoping they'd finally show some interest. That maybe this time they'd treat me like I belonged. It never happened. Then my grandmother Iris passed away. I had been her only regular visitor at Sunset Manor, a sprawling care facility that smelled of disinfectant and faded memories. Every Tuesday at 6 p.m., I'd walk in with a cooler of homemade chocolate chip cookies, the recipe she'd taught me when I was 12. The staff knew me by name. "Quinn's here for Mrs. Patterson," they'd announce warmly. They'd update me on her condition and ask about my business, remembering details my own family had forgotten. The rest of my family treated her like an obligation. Aunt Veronica visited twice in 5 years, both times to ask about her will. Uncle Randall sent flowers for her birthday, but couldn't remember which grandchild was which. "Tell me about your company again," she'd say as we played chess. her hands steady on the board. I'd explain client strategies, server infrastructure, and our expansion into mobile apps. She listened closely, asking thoughtful follow-up questions. You know, she'd smile, leaning back. I built the family construction business from nothing in 1952. Started with your grandfather and a pickup truck. Everyone said a woman couldn't run a construction company. Proved them wrong. Made more than any of their husbands ever did. She rarely shared these stories at family gatherings. With me, she spoke openly about early struggles, doubters, and the satisfaction of proving people wrong. You remind me of myself at your age, she'd say, capturing my bishop with her knight. Too stubborn to quit, too smart to fail. She stayed sharp until the end, remembering details about my business strategies my parents never cared to know. When I landed a 3-year, $2.4 million contract, she was the only one who understood its significance. That's empire-building money, she'd said, gripping my hand. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I was holding that same hand when she passed. The rest of the family was at Cousin Theo's engagement party, an event I wasn't invited to despite living nearby and helping Theo get his country club membership through a business contact. I learned of her death via a group text from my mother. Mom passed this afternoon. Funeral arrangements TBD. No call, no conversation, just a text like a dinner cancellation. When the lawyer called about the will reading, I almost didn't go. Another event where I'd be treated like help. But Attorney Morrison's voice was urgent. Mrs. Patterson specifically requested your presence, he said. She was very clear. The entire family packed into Morrison and Associates like vultures over a carcass. Mahogany furniture, leather chairs, whispered tones, the trappings of old money. Aunt Veronica had brought a leather portfolio with color-coded tabs. Uncle Randall whispered about property taxes, debating whether to sell or rent the mansion. Cousin Ava browsed luxury car listings on her phone, assuming she'd soon have a down payment. They all expected the estate, worth nearly $20 million, to be split evenly. A $2.3 million Victorian mansion, $4.1 million in investments, and a $12 million construction business. Even divided 12 ways, everyone would leave a millionaire. I sat quietly in the back, watching them mentally spend money they didn't have yet. Attorney Morrison cleared his throat. I, Iris Elizabeth Patterson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this my last will and testament. The usual legal boilerplate followed. Then, the important part. To my beloved family, I leave you exactly what you gave me in my final years. Confused murmurs rippled through the room. Aunt Veronica stopped writing. Uncle Randall looked up from his tax notes. To my daughter Veronica, who visited me twice in 5 years and forgot my last 3 birthdays, I leave my disappointment and best wishes. The room went silent. To my son Randall, who sent flowers once a year but couldn't remember which grandchildren belonged to which parents, I leave my sadness and hope you'll learn the value of presence over presence. To my grandchildren, Theo, Ava, Finn, and others who inherited their parents' priorities, I leave the same attention you gave me, which is to say none at all. Finally, to my grandson Quinn, who held my hand every Tuesday for 6 years, who remembered my birthday with homemade cookies, who listened to my stories and shared his dreams, the only one who knew me as a person rather than a bank account. I leave everything else. My stomach dropped. Everything else meant the mansion, the portfolios, the business, everything they'd assumed was theirs. Morrison continued. Mrs. Patterson also left letters for family members to be distributed at my discretion. He handed me an envelope marked "For Quinn's eyes only." Inside, in her handwriting, "My dear Quinn, if you're reading this, my funeral is over and the vultures are circling. I'm sure they're shocked, but you shouldn't be. You were the only one who saw me as a person. While they saw dollar signs, you saw your grandmother. They'll try every manipulation, guilt trip, and promise of change. Be ready. I've left instructions with Morrison about any attempts to contest this will. I've been documenting their absence for years. You built something from nothing, just like I did. Don't let them tear it down. All my love, Grandmother Iris. P.S. The construction business records are in the basement safe. Combination, your birthday in reverse. You'll find some interesting reading about unpaid family loans." The room erupted. "This is ridiculous!" Aunt Veronica shouted, composure cracking. "We'll contest this," Uncle Randall declared, turning red. Cousin Theo frantically texted, probably a lawyer friend. Ava cried real tears for the first time over something not tied to her bank account. Attorney Morrison sat calmly. Mrs. Patterson anticipated this. She underwent 6 months of mental competency evaluations. All confirmed she was of sound mind. He adjusted his glasses. "She also asked me to inform you. Any attempt to contest this will result in the immediate release of family financial records she maintained over the years. Unpaid loans, questionable practices, and tax irregularities." The silence that followed was different. No longer disbelief, but realization. Aunt Veronica's face turned green. Uncle Randall began sweating. "She wouldn't," Veronica whispered. "She was a businesswoman for 70 years, Morrison replied. "She kept excellent records." And just like that, the fight ended. Not because they accepted the will, but because they knew they'd been caught. I walked out of that office dazed, holding documents that made me one of the wealthiest people in the state, and holding secrets that could ruin those who'd spent decades undermining me. The call started before I reached my car. Within an hour, my phone lit up with messages from people who hadn't spoken to me in months. Aunt Veronica. "Quinn, honey, we need to talk. Family dinner tonight at my house. 7 o'clock. Sharp. Uncle Randall." "Hey, buddy." I hadn't heard from most of my relatives in months, some in years, until the inheritance news spread. Suddenly, my phone was filled with messages. "Aunt Veronica, Quinn, honey, let's have dinner at my place tonight. 7 sharp. Uncle Randall, hey, buddy, long time no see. Coffee tomorrow? My treat." Cousin Theo, congrats, man. We should celebrate. Drinks on me. Even Ava chimed in. I've been meaning to call for weeks. I really miss talking to you. Even my parents, who lived only a few miles away and rarely spoke to me unless it was to ask if I was still playing with computers, suddenly wanted to reconnect. Veronica's invitation wasn't really optional. It was more of a summons. I almost skipped it. A big part of me wanted time alone to process what had just happened, to figure out how I was supposed to handle $20 million and a construction business I had no experience running. But another part of me, the part that had been overlooked for 28 years, wanted to see how desperation looked on the faces of people who had spent decades making me feel like I didn't matter. When I arrived at Uncle Randall's house, every eye turned to me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't ignored or passed over. All attention was on me. "Quinn!" Veronica practically lunged for a hug. her perfume strong and her tone overly cheerful. "You look amazing. How's business? I've been meaning to ask about your company for ages." It was the first time in 15 years she'd shown any interest in my work. Randall guided me to the head of the dining table, the seat reserved for the most important person. I'd never been offered it before, not even when I was the only family member who attended someone's birthday. For nearly 3 decades, I'd eaten at the kids' table, on folding chairs, or tucked away at the counter. Now, I was being placed at the head like some kind of honored guest. "We're so proud of you," Randall continued, as he pulled out the chair with exaggerated ceremony. Theo nodded enthusiastically. "I always knew you'd be successful. Remember when you built that computer as a kid? I told everyone you were going to go far." I stared at him. "You smashed it and called it a waste of time." His smile faltered for a split second before recovering. "Kids, right? We didn't recognize your genius back then." And just like that, history was rewritten. Every insult became encouragement. Every dismissal turned into supposed support. "I always told people you were the brightest one in the family," claimed Veronica, the same person who once introduced me as her odd nephew. "We knew the computer thing would pay off eventually," added my mother, who had spent years calling it a passing phase. For an hour, they rewrote 28 years of family history, disguising strategy as sincerity. It wasn't regret, it was calculation. Then came the real purpose. "We're concerned," Veronica began carefully, lowering her voice. "Managing such a large inheritance is a big responsibility. Overwhelming, even," Randall added. "You shouldn't have to carry that burden alone." "We want to help," Theo said quickly. "Families should stick together." Finally, Ava produced a folder, clearly prepared ahead of time. "Maybe we could form a family trust," she suggested, spreading documents across the table. "Pool the inheritance for everyone's benefit. Share both responsibility and rewards." There it was, their plan. They'd spent the day with lawyers and advisors, figuring out how to redirect what legally belonged to me. Randall had always been skilled at disguising self-interest as generosity. "Grandmother would have wanted us to share," Veronica insisted, her tone heavy with staged emotion. "She always valued family unity," Randall added. "She wouldn't want her decision to divide us." I almost laughed. The same people who ignored her for years were now speaking as though they knew her wishes best. "You're right," I finally said. "Money shouldn't divide families." Their faces brightened. They thought they'd won. In fact, I've learned a lot about family this week. I pulled out my phone and opened my voice memo app. For years, I'd recorded family conversations, not for blackmail, but because I thought I was the problem and wanted to review what I said wrong. What I discovered instead was evidence. For example, I said, scrolling, "Last Christmas, Aunt Veronica called me a basement-dwelling loser who'll never amount to anything. Would you like to hear it?" Her face went pale. The wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Or Uncle Randall's theory that I'm autistic because I don't get social cues. I have that one too. And my personal favorite, Ava telling her sorority sisters she avoided photos with me so she wouldn't be linked to the family embarrassment. The room went silent. For years, I thought I was failing to connect with you. The truth is, I wasn't the problem. You were. "Quinn, please," Veronica began. "Let me play another," I interrupted. I hit play. Her voice filled the room. "He's just pathetic. Still playing with computers. Theo's a doctor, Ava's a lawyer, Finn's moving up. What does Quinn have? Some silly website business bound to fail. Randall's voice followed. The kid's delusional. When he comes crawling back, maybe I'll give him some construction work. Manual labor will teach him humility. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting. For 6 years, I said quietly, I watched Grandmother Iris wait at the door every Tuesday, hoping one of you would visit. She saved newspaper clippings about your achievements to feel connected. She asked to see your photos on Facebook. She worried she'd failed you somehow. I told her you were just busy. I made excuses for you so she wouldn't feel abandoned. But she knew the truth. I stood, leaving the head of the table empty. You want to know what she really wanted? A phone call, a visit, to be remembered on her birthday, for her grandson to be treated with basic respect. Randall tried again. We can change, Quinn. We're still family. You're right, I said at the doorway. We are family. And I'm giving you exactly what you gave me all these years. I looked each of them in the eye. Nothing. The aftermath was relentless. Calls, emails, voicemails, emotional appeals, guilt trips, even legal threats. They tried to contest the will, but video evidence of Iris's sharp mind and her clear explanations shut that down fast. The nursing home staff testified to my visits and their absence. The case collapsed. Then came the consequences. Veronica lost her house after years of living on credit, counting on an inheritance that never came. Randall's restaurant closed when debts caught up, made worse by health code violations. Theo's engagement ended when his fiancée realized his family wealth wasn't coming. Ava buried herself in debt, struggling to keep up appearances until reality hit. 6 months later, my parents tried one last approach. They showed up at my office with tears and promises. We love you. Money doesn't matter. We just want our son back. I didn't look up from my desk. Where was that love when I graduated? When I started my business? When I needed support during my divorce? Dad straightened his tie. We weren't perfect, but we can start over. Family is forever. You're right, I said, finally meeting his eyes. Family is forever. But I stopped expecting anything from mine. I pulled a $500 check from my drawer. That covers the total value of my birthday gifts from the last decade. Consider us even. Their faces said it all. Shock, hurt, and the realization that I wasn't the pushover they once knew. A year later, I ran into Ava at a coffee shop. She looked different, tired, broke, stripped of all the polished image she once clung to. Quinn, she said softly, I know I don't deserve this, but could we talk? I studied her, expecting manipulation. Instead, I saw something real. I've been thinking about that night, she continued, tears streaming. You were right about everything. We treated you horribly. We treated Grandma horribly. And we knew it. We did it anyway. Why? Because it was easier than admitting we were jealous. You built something real while we coasted, and we punished you for it. For the first time, someone admitted the truth. No excuses, no spin, just honesty. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. And I'm not asking for money. I just wanted you to know we finally understand what we lost. I bought her coffee. We sat for hours while she told me about losing her law firm job, drowning in debt, and watching fake friends disappear. I'm learning what you always knew, she said. The only things worth having are the ones you earn yourself. 6 months later, Ava was the only relative I invited to my wedding. She never asked for money or favors. She just showed up as a cousin. The rest of the family saw the photos online. Randall left a comment hinting at his struggles. Theo sent a long message about wanting to rebuild. My parents stayed silent. Today, the inheritance funds a nonprofit foundation in Iris's name, supporting tech education for underprivileged kids who remind me of myself, driven but lacking support. The construction company is thriving under professional management, and the mansion is now the Iris Patterson Community Center, offering after-school programs and small business training. Sometimes I wonder if I should have been more forgiving. But then I remember Iris waiting by the door on Tuesday nights, asking why her family had forgotten her. And I know I made the right choice. Some things can't be bought. Forgiveness is one of them. After 28 years of being invisible, I finally understood. My presence was a gift, one that had to be earned, not demanded. The black sheep doesn't always stay with the flock. Sometimes it builds a neigh.